Travel is more than just ticking off countries. It's about the people, the culture, the food, the moments. I'm Pippa Hudson, and on Wonder the World, I invite you to join me every week as we explore destinations both near and far, with the help of fellow adventurers who share their unique travel stories. Listen to my podcast wherever you get them.
The Dialogue with Clement Manyathela.
It's not just another roundtable discussion.
Let's walk the talk on 702.
On our Thursday Dialogue today, we are looking at how private actors influence politics, or maybe you want to argue geopolitics. Are we seeing an increasing involvement of private actors and multinational corporations in the creation of public policy? There's no doubt, as I said to you earlier, that private interests have always played a role in some way in the creation of public policy. I mean, we've always had private actors. We've seen their influence behind the scenes. They've done that for years, but mostly behind the scenes. But now it's on our faces, right? Across the world, you've got these tech giants, these billionaire entrepreneurs that are not just market players. They are geopolitical actors too. Their entry into strategic sectors, whether it's infrastructure, energy, telecommunications, raises some difficult questions that we must answer about national sovereignty and policy autonomy. In fact, what has really inspired this conversation, because a lot of people have written opinion pieces about this, the discussion has already started about this. It's since also the communications minister, Solly Malatsi, announced those plans. Remember, we spoke about this yesterday, where he said he's not planning to water down our own local legislation to suit Elon Musk's Starlink. And this is after he had made a proposal, that draft policy directive on equity equivalent investment programs in the ICT sector. But the move has highlighted this growing and often unchecked influence of private actors and multinational corporations and how they're shaping public policy. So who gets to define the public interest in a world where wealth, data, and digital infrastructure yield so much power? Is policy being redefined by the private interests under the guise of, innovation and investment? Are these private actors reshaping geopolitics? And what are the consequences of that? I'd like you to share your thoughts with us on this on 011-883-0702 or send a WhatsApp on 072-702-1702. Let me introduce you to my guests this morning on the Thursday Dialogue. We've got Professor Steven Sidley, who is a professor of practice at Joburg Business School, joining us via Zoom. Prof, thank you for making time. Good morning.
Good morning.
We also have Thembisa Fakude, who is a senior research fellow and director at Africa-Asia Dialogues. Thembisa, thanks for making time. Hi.
Thanks for having me.
And lastly, Tebogo Khaas, who's the chairperson of Public Interest South Africa. Tebogo, thank you so much for also making time for us. Tebogo, I think you may be muted. All right, we'll come back to Tebogo in a moment. We'll try to reestablish that line with him. Prof, let me start with you. What do you think of these private players and the influence that we're beginning to see more and more on politics and geopolitics? Are we seeing an increasing involvement of these private actors and multinational corporations in the creation of public policy? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it goes further than that. There's been sort of an avalanche of change which has happened over the past 10 years or so in terms of the effect of private industry on politics, to the extent that there is really no politics anymore. There's only technopolitics. And of course, really here I'm talking about the United States and China and perhaps some of the other smaller countries. It hasn't quite reached our shores yet, although obviously we're feeling the effects of it. So let me just talk just for a second, if I may, about a man by the name of Curtis Yarvin, who is the intellectual dark force behind what has happened in the Trump administration with Musk and the others. He has a theory. He's just a philosopher. And his theory is that traditionally we've had the left and the right. We've had capitalism on one side and, at least in the old days, communism on the other side. And he says that those days are gone. And you now have a thing called corporatism. which does not sit in the spectrum. And corporatism is where countries are run by corporations, influenced by private money, have a CEO, etc., etc. And people like the Vice President, J.D. Vance, Trump, various of others have all been deeply affected by them. And as a consequence of that, you find these extraordinarily wealthy. And it's not important that they're wealthy. They've been wealthy people before who want to get richer from government favors. These people are extraordinarily wealthy and want to inflict their view of the world on the rest of the globe.
Yeah.
And that is the big difference now to Rockefeller or DuPont or any of the other people from history.
Thembisa, what are the consequences of that? I mean, as South Africa, how do we then safeguard our sovereignty in the face of this growing influence from these global tech giants? And I mean, is policy being redefined by these private interests under the guise of, well, this is innovation, this is investment? Is there a way that we can safeguard ourselves and our sovereignty?
Are you asking the question of me?
So sorry, that's for you, Thembisa.
Oh, okay. I think for me, the mistake we all made was to take for granted these liberties that our forebears brought to us. We thought these were permanent and they did not need any form of maintenance. They did not need any form of proliferation. So what we had these other parallels proliferating, and we find ourselves where there is no base anymore to promote these liberties that we fought very hard for, because people are now having different interests, and one interest that's driving our society and civilization is accumulation of wealth, capitalism, and power. And what used to be some sort of a balancing mechanisms that existed alongside the capitalism and accumulation of power has evaporated. And as a result, we don't know actually what is our compass. Where are we heading to? What are we supposed to be heading to? What is the main objective of our living? All of us now talk about accumulation, and that's the main objective. And until we go back to the drawing board, I think you are likely to have this situation of the likes of Musk and all the current oligarchs who are controlling politics, not only in the United States, by the way, but around the world, continuing with their trajectory unhindered.
And so, Tebogo, someone made a suggestion earlier when I was talking about this conversation we were going to have this hour, and said, yeah, but are we not exaggerating here by questioning whether or not our sovereignty as a country is at stake? Because the private actors have always influenced policy behind closed doors. It's always been the case. So because now it's happening, in full view of everybody else, doesn't necessarily mean it's always not been the case. What are your thoughts? Do you think we're over exaggerating here?
Not quite. Not even by a mile are we over exaggerating. And I'll tell you why. It is quite worrisome that the brazenness within which this has been this is happening right in front of our eyes. It's no longer about suspecting this could be happening, so could be influencing this and the other politician or president. Here we've got foreign policy tools being used to advance state capture. Let's call it what it is. To advance destruction of social protections or social welfares. We've got power and money and politics intersecting to rip society of some of the semblance of protectionism, of protecting society. And it's a scary time, because are we headed for Darwinism? And openly so, you've got people who say survival of the fittest, survival of the richest. If you don't have wealth, if you don't have politics, if you don't have power, then you're out. And the sad thing is it happens at the behest of a leader of what they would call a free world, or a nation unto whom most of the world looks up to do good. and all we see is just evil being, perpetrated without any shame. So it is no exaggeration. And if we dare not raise antennas, or if we dare not push back, sadly, as Thembisa was saying, we are headed to a situation where our forebears never anticipated that this would happen, and therefore no mechanisms or no guardrails were put in place to ensure that such do not happen. And it started, as you've seen, how our constitution, our own local constitution, had been traversed. Even today, as we speak, you can see how much people have gone back to try and degrade, the constitutional order in place just to advance their own personal ends. It's scarier if here we're talking about the richest man in the world and the richest nation in the world perpetrating this kind of injustices to weak people across weak nations around the weak and powerful nations across the world.
Yeah, Prof, and I wonder, because a lot of South Africans, well, some are certainly asking questions about whether our government is being pressured, either directly or indirectly. There's pressure now to relax empowerment laws in favor of foreign investment. So this increasing involvement in politics that blurs the lines between, public and private power. Where do we draw the line then between diplomacy and lobbying? Because often, as we have seen, that is being blurred.
Yeah, I'm fairly cynical about this. I mean, we do not live in this country or in any other country. We are not an island. We have pretensions to sovereignty, which is embedded in our constitutions. But the truth of the matter is that in order to exist and create wealth for our citizens, we live in a global world where there is trade to and from different countries. And when one of those countries gets an outsized bunch of power which they can wield over us so that it has a direct effect, like Starlink, which would increase this country's GDP, according to some estimates, by over 1.2%. That is real pressure. That is not one standing and putting one's hand on one's heart and saying nobody tells us what to do. The only consequence of taking a position like we are a sovereign state and nobody tells us what to do is that you impoverish your own citizens, because this telecommunications system, and I'm choosing Musk, there are other systems as well, AI is the big one. One cannot ignore pressure that is being brought by the big tech bros, because you end up shooting yourself in the foot. So you cut off your nose to spite your face. One has to take cognizance of the fact that there are people outside. If we want their goodies, we have to sacrifice our goodies, and unfortunately, in this case, it's sacrificing part of our sovereignty.
Yeah, Thembisa, these tech firms. I mean, you look at Starlinks, for instance. They are no longer just your service providers. They're global actors. What do they signal about the shifting balance of power between states and corporations? And again, what safeguards should South Africa develop to protect its policy sovereignty in this tech-driven global economy?
Well, luckily, we're a country of laws, a country of constitution. We're not a country of executive orders like the United States. And that's a very, very important point, that South Africa must be open. I've got no problem with Starlink as long as they understand that there are rules and regulations within which you should operate. And luckily, the likes of Cyril Ramaphosa, when they drafted this constitution that we all cherish, took that into consideration. And it's time now to test the shock absorbers of this constitution. And we see those shock absorbers responding very well, because there's public discussions, the radio talk shows discussing this. And Elon Musk will not just come in and start his business without adhering to rules and regulations that are already existent in this country. So the world is moving, but we must not miss the boat. We should be part and parcel of that ever-moving and mobile world, including issues of AI. Starlink is an interesting discussion, and I think we must not throw the baby with the bathwater. We should be part and parcel of it. We have systems in place, and let the shock absorbers of a constitution react, but we do not believe in executive orders, no preventing business. which is likely to benefit not only us but future generations. And if we become adverse to the advent and the movement and improvement of AI, we are likely to disadvantage and shortchange future generations of South Africa. Let the Constitution respond. Let us make sure that Elon Musk comes in, but he operates within the law, and we encourage business. We are desperate for business in South Africa. We're desperate for innovation and investment. And we can't just say no to any investment that comes simply because it's coming from someone like Elon Musk. Let him come, but he has to understand that there are rules and regulations in order to operate within.
Yeah, and how cautious then, Tebogo, do we need to be? Because, and I know you've argued this even in your article a few days ago about, what Starlink has been able to do, right? Enabling connectivity in remote areas. But it's also quietly assumed this role of, as you argued in your article, modern warfare. What are some of the examples that we've seen, particularly with Starlink, that should actually get us to be more cautious? I mean, you look at the AI chatbot Grok and how it's positioned itself now. It's no longer just a platform, that you can trust to be independent. We've seen what happened a couple of weeks ago, where it was fed information, where it started even responding to questions that are not about white genocide, but because it's been told to say that, then it starts releasing that information. How cautious do we need to be?
We should be worried, very worried. And if we haven't started to be worried, then we should be worried about ourselves. Because I'll tell you why. Two things. Firstly, and in response to what the Prof has just said earlier, we appreciate the fact that we are an economy that's desperate for growth. But growth at what cost? And growth for what end? Because we've been here before. We've had an economy that was growing at around 5% in the mid-90s. And at some point, we're actually hopeful to make 6%. But still, we had jobless growth. And as that was taking place, we were in the midst of transactions, most notably the arms deal, where we were promised that there will be offsets. I can't remember the correct word for it, but similar to equity equivalence. But where those who have benefited from the arms deal or contracts will be able to plow back into society and make sure that there is establishment or enterprise development, training, and so forth, and all that. What have we got to show for that? Because we've now know for a fact that we really don't have tangible things that's related to arms industry. In fact, the negative has happened where we find the hollowing out of the likes of Dinel and Armscor, with some of the IP also leaving these shores, whatever. I always ask, once we start bending figures like 1%, 2% is going to inject, what is the basis upon which such figures are being fed to us? And have we really interrogated them? And because it's always easier to say we'll create employment of 1 million people or 1 million youth and all that, but nobody has gone back to check, indeed, has that happened? Two, the most worrisome issue also is the erosion of the international order. International law is under peril. It's under peril and it's under attack by the Trump administration. They decide which laws to subscribe to and which laws to disregard with willful abandon. We know that they don't subject themselves to the ICC or the ICJ. So even when you have to arbiter certain instances where you might find a political actor or a business political actor such as Starlink or Musk coming into here, if they do wrong in South Africa, how are you going to be able to account to hold them to account if they do not want to subject themselves to the laws of the country, where there might be that certain dispensation are put in place to ensure that they play just by the rules, just like any other person? Because if you've got somebody here whose assets are sitting somewhere in the sky and you have to litigate against them, chances are, if you have to recover, you might very well not be. And the harm that can be done could be foretold many times over what many people could have thought, especially where we know, as you use the example of Grok. If we use Starlink as an example to provide education facilities in some far-flung areas because our local players don't have the capacity to do that. And I like the fact that you highlight the fact there are other people, I think it was Thembisa, there are other companies, Viasat, you name them, who can do the same thing. If you have a player like Musk, he can decide on a whim that he doesn't like the educational content that is being delivered in Lusikisiki or in some other rural areas, and he can switch off the platform. What are you going to do? Nothing. Zero. And it's the same thing. You could be in the middle of a telemedicine operation in Lenyenye, in Tikilain or Palabora, and then Musk decide, no, I don't like what this clinic is doing regarding provision of abortion. I'm going to switch them off. How accountable are we going to be able to hold them? So this is very, very concerning, and we are saying that legislators must work very carefully in making sure that as they provide licenses or allow players such as Starlink, which we need. But we should not be fooled or lulled into sales phones of hope that it's all good intentions that Musk is bringing here. By the way, the road to hell is also paved in gold, as the saying goes.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite scary that all this technological infrastructure is no longer seen now as neutral, but you have to now think about whether or not the companies are trying to somehow exert some level of influence. Maybe they are a potential vector of strategic influence. I mean, the example you're giving about switching things off because you don't agree reminds me of what was reported also about what he did in Ukraine. Really quite worrisome. It's 11:30 now.
The Dialogue with Clement Manyathela.
It's not just another roundtable discussion.
Let's walk the talk on 702.
All right, let's go to your calls now and your WhatsApps as we continue our conversation on our Thursday dialogue about the influence and the role of these private actors and that influence on politics, geopolitics. How concerned should we be about our sovereignty as nations? How concerned should we be about the influence and sometimes politics being used? These private actors, their associations to powerful politicians, and using that then to put pressure on other countries and put pressure even on geopolitical issues. Are you concerned about that? What are your thoughts? 011-883-0702. Your WhatsApps are coming on 072-702-1702.
Good morning, Clement and team. That's a very interesting topic that you have there. What surprises me is that corporations have been technically running countries for many years. What I find surprising is that now they are coming out in the open. So it is no longer a thing of pulling the strings behind the scenes, but actually coming up to the front to say that we are the ones that control things.
Clement, I don't believe that it's a question of, tech billionaires taking on public policy or influencing public policy. Public policy by the way it is designed in a capitalist society has always been directed by business, whether or not we like it. I mean, you can take a very simple way of looking at, say, the South African spatial development. Townships are where they are because business needed a labor pool. Who needed that labor pool? It would have been your Anglo-American, who was the biggest corporation at the time. This is why I think LTA was one of the first businesses that built those houses, Tebogo. So if you think of it from that perspective, it's really not a new thing. The question at hand ought to be rather whether that is appropriate. Was it appropriate then? Is it appropriate today?
Very good morning, Clement, and your guest. Of course, the global influence, we cannot run away. It has been happening for quite some time. If you remember the issue of gun-free America, those who are owning guns, they've been playing part in American politics, and it's not only in America. Everywhere across the globe, people with money, they are the ones who are running the economies. It has been happening, and it's going to be difficult to try to stop it. That's why you'll hear EFF calling the Ruberts, because they know that's what they're doing as politicians. They are funded by these people. Moshe Rebai.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your WhatsApp voice notes. Prof, you're welcome to reflect on that. But the question, I suppose, is, it's the same that I posed to Thembisa. What can we do then in us being cautious as a country. What do you think needs to happen?
Yeah, so let me answer in two ways there. One is a general answer, and then I'll turn to the specific. The general answer is let's take away the issue of Musk and Zuckerberg and AI and America and all the big players. Let's just take a hypothetical situation where an overseas country comes to us and says, here, we have this technology that will create 1 million jobs. And if you don't take it, you're going to lose 1 million jobs. If we then say, but you have to change your laws, right? You have to change your laws in order to get these 1 million jobs or not to lose the 1 million jobs. When you put the calculus that brutally, the government in power has to take a real politic position. They can either say, no, we're not going to change these laws because they are the moral conscience of our new constitutions. Or they can take the position is, man, if I'm going to lose 1 million jobs or gain 1 million jobs from taking this new technology, I will be voted back into power easily. This issue is not a simplistic let's stand on our principles issue. There's real politics there. So I wanted to give that brutal example because in a minor way, that's what's happening with the Starlink thing. With respect to some of the questions that were asked, the reason why this time is different, Clement, is that the technologies that these men control, and they are all men, can move global opinion. So whether it be Musk or Zuckerberg or Google or any of the others, it's no longer Standard Oil saying they're going to give their favorite politicians some money so that the politicians will favor their special pork barrel projects. It's now a situation of these companies saying to the politicians, you are going to do exactly what we tell you. Otherwise, we will tilt global opinion or national opinion away from you. These technologies are infinitely more powerful from an influence point of view than we have ever seen in the past. And that's why I claim that these private individuals have far more power than we have ever seen before. They actually run the politicians now like clocks.
Hi, Clement, and to your guests. I'm listening to this discussion and I worry about having somebody like Elon Musk in our country with a powerful system like Starlink. While it will obviously bring some benefits to us, but will we not be opening up ourselves for information breaches? Because once he is here, who is going to control him? He can come here and say he's going to follow the law, give us a taste of what his systems can do, and then who is going to control him? That is my fear. Tomorrow what we'll find is sensitive information being leaked to his cronies. Ralph in Boxburg.
Yeah, Thembisa, do you think that's where it would get to? The level of risk we're looking at?
I don't think so. We've been here before, by the way. I remember when the Chinese were aggressively coming to South Africa. I mean, not to South Africa, but to Africa. And the response was, the Chinese are helping the dictators, and dictatorship is going to rise as a result of their see no evil, hear no evil policy when it comes to business. And my response at the time was, businesses are there to maximize profit. And that's the point. Elon Musk is not in the business of social responsibility projects. He's there to make money. So what government's supposed to do is to make sure that there are systems in place to protect South Africans from abuse from people such as Elon Musk. But he's not here to do anything else but to impose himself and do business. And I'm glad that we've got a constitution in this country. And as I said, it's not a country that's run by executive orders, but we have a rule of law. But at the same time, we can't throw the baby with bathwater. We need business. We need Elon Musk. And if Starlink is going to facilitate economic development and social development in this country, it has to come in. But I am also cognizant of what Tebogo said in terms of the respect of international law and recourse. So if you're going to have people like Elon Musk who do not adhere or respect the international law, and we can't have recourse, should it decide to violate certain rules and regulations in this country, then we have a problem. But I think we are a big country, strong country that's often biting more than it can chew in terms of foreign policy and business. And we are now in this situation, which is interesting and fascinating times in our history, where we say there are these aggressive business people who want to come in and do as they please. We're not going to allow them, but at the same time, we're not going to chase their business. Because if we do so, I do believe we're going to be disadvantaging future generations, where we have these extra cautious regulations and protectionism coming into South Africa, that we're not going to be playing with the big boys. We are in a situation now where our economy is attractive. South Africa is a respected country and people want to deal with us. But we need to understand that it's not going to be smooth sailing. We're going to deal with people like Elon Musk, but how do you do that? Do you protect your economy and business people from engaging, or you put systems in place while at the same time encouraging this new business to come into our country?
Yeah. So, Tebogo, Thembisa there speaks about our constitution. But does Elon Musk even respect that? I mean, he has not only undermined, when you look at what his views have been on DEI initiatives in the US, but it's almost like he's positioning himself as, a vocal antagonist of progressive democratic values just globally.
I do not disagree with what Thembisa has said, but I think we should also rid ourselves of any naivety. Here we're not talking hypotheticals. We know what through Doge, Elon Musk has been able to do in the US itself, where he has eviscerated any controls or inspectorate of oversights in many departments, laid off people that are with the power that he had, obviously. And here we talk about somebody who was not elected, and somebody who had a quasi special employment status in the US, who has allegedly mined some of the information potentially for his commercial interests within the Treasury, the US Treasury, and all that, with his young men that he sent through. So we're not talking here about somebody who's not a social genius. We're not talking here about somebody who doesn't have the proclivity to do evil. But we've seen he's demonstrated himself how evil he is. So if we're going to say somebody who can rid the US, the country where he's domiciled, of jobs, who are we to think that will bring 1 million jobs in this country? That's just a poser. And I'm not saying we should not be open for business, as we should be, but we should walk with one eye open. And just to hammer that point about the influence of business, we've just last night, I'm sure you've picked it up, when the U.S. Court of International Trade actually pushed back on Trump's executive orders on tariffs. And they said, no, this is a power that belongs to Congress, not you. We are happy that there is still some of that sanity within the U.S. government or system. But lo and behold, we shouldn't allow the likes of business people who go into the Oval Office, such as our own Mr. Rupert, who went on there and basically just anointed Starlink. You ask yourself, what is the role of our own legislature? Who's got the mandate to legislate and make sure? If you're a chair of ICASA or a councillor of ICASA and you're sitting in your office or at your home and you're watching the richest man in South Africa actually telling the world that Starlink is a player, you must worry. You must get worried. If us as civil society pick up those things, we have the right to worry and say, legislator, don't just rush, blindfolded into this thing. Make sure that when you legislate accordingly. But we don't say you must be anti-business. You mustn't be pushing policies that will make it difficult to do business. But at the same time, we mustn't allow ourselves to open ourselves continuously for such extractive foreign, what you'd normally call economic hitmen, but in this instance, they're just private actors who leverage U.S. policy to actually advance their own commercial interests.
Yeah. Yo, that's fascinating stuff. Professor Sidley, Thembisa Fakude, Tebogo. I'm going to take a quick ad break now, and when we come back, we'll go back to the WhatsApp voice notes. 9 minutes before.
Your voice,
Your questions.
your morning radio with Clement Manyathela.
This is 702.
7 minutes now before 12.
Good day, Clement. Good day, 702 land. That's Abraham in Florida. Clement, it wouldn't be an issue if Elon Musk had stayed away from this kill the poor, kill the farmer saga that's going on. So he's in the midst of the saga, and yet he wants to assume control of government's communication and internet connection, which doesn't make sense, right? He's already taking sides on the matters that are very of national importance. So it points that he might infiltrate and expose certain confidential information that's going on within our government that shouldn't be known to the public, right? Remember, we have a state security and all of that. We can't afford to relinquish that level of security to Elon Musk.
I think it's quite dangerous waters that we're playing, and we've seen what Starlink has done in Ukraine, right? It's been so key in assisting Ukraine to do what they're doing against Russia. Now, I'm not going to make comment on that particular situation, but what I mean by that is that now imagine already Musk is coming into South Africa with the notion that there are things, he's accusing us of things that we know is not happening. So we know he's profoundly against the notions of our government, a democratically elected government. So what do you think he's going to do once he has access to our country at that level? It's a dangerous game we're playing. If really this is about economic assistance, then let's look at other alternatives. Let's put proper competition into that market.
We really have to tread with caution here. Professor Steven Sidley, Professor of Practice at the Joburg Business School, Thembisa Fakude, Senior Research Fellow and Director at Africa-Asia Dialogues, and Tebogo Khaas, who's the Chairperson of Public Interest South Africa. Thank you so much for making time for us. It's